Good morning, sisters and brothers in Christ at Lord of Life in Kenosha and others who are watching this. This is Pastor Carol Jeanette, interim pastor at Lord of Life Lutheran Church in Kenosha. I hope you're doing well and that last weekend, restrictions and all, was a good and restful time for you. I'm grateful to be back home after our trip to Iowa to pick up our son. Thank you for the prayers. I apologize for not getting this out yesterday. I made a good start on it, but I got stuck. And then the day got going and it got put aside. And then today I got stuck again. So we'll see where we end up. For some reason or another, perhaps because of the travel over the weekend, yesterday I was remembering a trip that I once took from Denver to the other side of Lake Michigan, the Eastern Shore, maybe 15 years ago. The wife of a good friend and colleague of mine was throwing a surprise party for his 70th birthday. She had sent email invitations to folks all over the country asking for cards. Given that the party was in midwinter and kind of in the middle of nowhere, she didn't really expect anyone from out of town to attend. I was living in Denver, and I had a voucher for an airline flight that was going to expire before too long, and it was burning a hole in my pocket. So I called my friend's wife, Ginny, and we hatched a plan. I flew into Detroit the evening before the party and rented a car and drove across the state. Did I say I was by myself? Well, because I intentionally rented a car that had GPS, I didn't look carefully at maps. I think I had a smartphone, but I wasn't very good at the maps part of it. But it was okay. I had the GPS in the car. Well, it seemed like I had been driving forever. It was late, and it was dark, and it was winter, and I was alone in an area that I had been in one time before during the daytime in the summer when John was driving, which meant I wasn't paying any attention at all to how we got to where we were going. I was depending on that GPS, that disembodied voice that seemed so sure of itself and was telling me what to do. But for all I knew, it could be completely wrong. And it was late, and I was alone. And it was cold, and the roads were, okay, it wasn't snowing, but this is still Michigan in the winter. And given that I was trying to do this trip kind of surreptitiously, no one was waiting to greet me. No one would even know if I had disappeared into the wilds of western Michigan. I drove through a town on the shore of Lake Michigan. It was a bustling place during the summer, but in the dead of winter, it was pretty deserted. I knew I was in the right town. I'd seen the sign, and it looked vaguely familiar. But there was a sprawling old white hotel on the bay, and I could have sworn I'd never seen it before. I mean, I would have remembered a place that reminded me of the hotel in Stephen King's book, The Shining. And the fact that there were no lights on there, and the place was definitely closed, kind of enhanced its spookiness and my unease. I kept driving, but was getting more and more nervous, until I finally stopped and decided to try to get directions on my phone, but there was no signal. I kicked myself for not getting a map and re-entered the address into the car's GPS. And the disembodied voice told me, make a U-turn. Oops. Well, before I went into a full panic attack, I managed to get on the right street and find my destination and make my way into the darkened house where I was staying. Okay, the GPS worked. Not quite the way I'd hoped, but it worked, and I made it to my destination. So what got me onto this topic as I sit at my desk near the western shore of Lake Michigan? The connection, I think, is to the GPS and to wandering around in the dark, feeling lost and kind of panicky, not knowing where I was, not knowing what direction to go. And I think the connection is that during this pandemic, at times it feels like there is no GPS, or that the GPS is messed up and I can't rely on it, or that there are multiple GPS systems, each giving different guidance. So this makes me wonder about the origin of the GPS that I'm trying to follow. One could say that the government is our GPS guiding us through this difficult time, but then one would have to say which government? Federal, state, city, county? And what about the conflicting voices within the governments? They're not monolithic. Now, the expected answer from a pastor, of course, is that God is our GPS, and that is the right answer. But that GPS isn't monolithic either. There seem to be different gods, or people have different gods, or God is giving different guidance to different people, and I don't think that's really what God does. So what is our GPS? I think it is God. But I think we have to be careful about how we interpret God's guidance here. And what we think about God and what God is about is what helps us know God's guidance. If we interpret God as the one who punishes people who are bad or unfaithful and rewards people who are good and faithful, then in this pandemic, our GPS leads us to focus only on ourselves and the good folks, and illness might be interpreted as a sign of judgment. There's a lot of fear in this one, and I don't think it works. A variation on this understanding of God would be what I call the vending machine understanding, that if we enter the correct number and combination of prayers and money and good works, God is going to lead us through this unscathed. I don't think this one flies either. Another interpretation would be that God has already chosen and willed who's going to get sick, who's going to die, who's going to be fine. All taken care of already, and our response doesn't matter at all. With this understanding of God, our GPS would say, don't worry, do what you want, when you want, how you want, because what you do doesn't make any difference. So God as a GPS during this pandemic has a lot to do with how we understand God to begin with. The thing that drew me into the Lutheran Church all those years ago, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, was grace. God's grace as a gift, offered through the death and resurrection of Jesus. I believe this grace is for all, whether or not we figure it out. It doesn't depend on us. It depends on God. And when we realize the depth of love and grace, when we begin to figure it out, then our response is gratitude. And it's a desire to share that love with others, with our neighbor. With this understanding of God, then the GPS leads us to actions that are loving of neighbor, which right now for many of us means staying home and trying to not go crazy and trying to continue to be loving to folks that we may be spending way too much time with right now. For others of us, loving neighbor means going out and putting oneself at risk in order to use gifts and skills that they have to love others. Now, I don't know about you, but often when somebody tells me I have to do something, for example, the GPS, or if somebody tells me I have to stay in or have to be patient when I try to order something online because other people have to stay in as well, okay, that's my latest. Or I can't just walk into a restaurant for dinner, or I can't actually see people when I lead worship, much less give anyone outside of my immediate family a hug. When someone tells me I have to do something or I can't do something, I want to know the reasons. And the reasons for what we have to do now, I think, have to go beyond fear. They have to be tied in with how we understand God and God's guidance right now. And that has to be grace. Grace and love for all. And my response to that grace is to love my neighbor. I'm going on and on today, sorry. You can probably figure out why I didn't finish this up and send it out yesterday, but perhaps this doesn't carry much weight. It's kind of where my head was. But my hope is that as this pandemic and our response to it drags on, as it gets harder and harder to do social distancing and scarier to think about the economy and getting back to work and what things are going to look like in the months ahead, my hope is that we can remember who it is that is guiding us, God, and what it is that God is about, which is grace and love for the world. This is our GPS. Now, by the way, back to the story. When I got lost and was wandering around and getting scared, it was because I thought the GPS was taking me the wrong way and I ignored it. Peace to you in these days, my friends. I promise I'll make the next one shorter. Take care.